Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. My name is Zain, and I'm a member of the McGill Muslim Alumni Society executive team. I graduated with BCom from McGill in 2016 and have been involved with the MAS since its inception in 2019. I'd like to thank you all for attending the first MAS online event, dealing with COVID, a three-dimensional approach. We are greatly honored to have you and our esteemed panelists join us in the first of hopefully many beneficial online events that we have lined up for the coming few months, inshallah. I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce the MAS. The MAS is an alumni group of McGill graduates that is affiliated with the McGill Alumni Association. It is a young organization that was founded just last year. Yet, alhamdulillah, we currently have over 160 members, and we have organized a number of events in both Montreal and Toronto. The MAS is open to all McGill graduates and non-graduates who are keen on supporting the MAS vision and mandate. The MAS's vision is to create a strong and vibrant network of McGill Muslim graduates that can support each other as well as support McGill students in many aspects of life before and after graduation. This includes providing career advice and mentorship sessions, which we had offered at McGill in October 2019. The MAS also strives to build relationships and strengthen social ties between McGill alumni, which is why we conducted a networking event and barbecue in Toronto last year. Another goal of the MAS is to broaden our educational horizons and enrich our Islamic understanding. We accomplished this last February by hosting Imam Yasin Dwyer, the current Muslim chaplain at the University of Toronto, to present a number of lectures on Black Muslim history and the benefits of chaplaincy to student mental health on campus. The MAS has a number of major projects in the works, most significant of which is advocating for the provision of Muslim chaplaincy services and a prayer space accessible to McGill students. We hope to take major steps towards these efforts in the near future. While the COVID pandemic stalled some of our plans for the upcoming year, we are pleased to announce that we will be partaking in McGill's virtual homecoming event and will offer the first Muslim-oriented homecoming celebration in McGill's history, which will include a keynote address by a highly accomplished young McGill Muslim graduate, as well as a social networking session. If you're a McGill graduate, be sure to sign up to become a MAS member to receive exclusive updates and perks and to learn more about our surprise keynote speaker. If you're not a McGill graduate, fear not. You can also sign up as a friend of the MAS and gain access to many of the services and events the MAS offers. We will include the link to the membership form via email after the event is over, or you may visit our website, www.mmassociety.org, and click on Become a Member at any time. You can also follow our Facebook page and LinkedIn page to stay up to date with the MAS activities. Lastly, we are honored to present you with the MAS's first online event, which features a panel of 3 McGill alumni and MAS members from different disciplines. The goal of today's webinar is to provide advice on how to tackle the challenges the pandemic poses from 3 different aspects: our careers and profession, our mental health, and our spirituality and faith. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists from today. First, we have Rabia Siddiqui, who is going to be taking charge of our mental dimension. Rabia graduated with a BA in psychology from Ryerson University and an MA in counseling psychology from McGill University. She has experience working as a counselor in high school settings, doing crisis counseling with employee and family assistance programs, and is currently practicing community-based counseling in the non-profit sector. Rabia sits on the board of directors for the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association as their Ontario Anglophone director, and was a member of the executive team of the MSA McGill for the year 2014-2015. Her passions include organizing and participating in community education, conducting anti-stigma work for mental health in minority populations, and providing mentorship to new graduates. Next, we have Alvina Nadeem, who is going to be taking charge of our professional dimension. Born in Pakistan, raised in the US and Canada, Alvina graduated from McGill University with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a minor in management and a concentration in aeronautics. She is currently an engineer at the Commission Sociale de Montréal, and is also a professional and personal certified coach, running her own practice, Alvina and Coaching. She is currently participating in several local projects, such as Coaching Away and the ALT sponsorship program by the Canadian Bureau of International Education. Having traveled and worked in several cities in North America, Alvina has had the opportunity to interact with people from different cultures and professions, including fellow engineers, young entrepreneurs, and local musicians. Her aim is to help people achieve their goals and fulfill their purpose on a professional and personal level. Lastly, we have Manar Gamian, who is going to be taking care of the spiritual dimension. Manar is a McGill graduate who, over the past 3 years, has worked as a spiritual care provider at several of Toronto's trauma and acute care hospitals. Currently, he tends to the psycho-spiritual needs of patients at West Park Healthcare Center, a physical rehab and complex continuing care hospital in Toronto. Manar also worked with the Muslim Chaplaincy of Toronto, a non-profit organization that focuses on addressing the emotional, psychological, religious, and spiritual needs of university students. Manar holds a master's degree from the University of Toronto and a registered psychotherapist in Ontario. So now that that is out of the way, I'm going to give our wonderful panelists each an opportunity to briefly informally introduce themselves to us and also possibly add a few quick opening notes to this event. First off, we have Rabia.
Volume.
Rabia, unfortunately, we can't hear you right now. She is currently and is also a professional and personal Canadian Bureau of International Education. Having traveled and worked several cities in North America, Alvina has had the opportunity to interact with people of different cultures, professions, IT issue here. I will request all panelists and all members to background psychological, religious, and spiritual needs of university students. One holds a master's degree from the University of Toronto and is registered psychotherapist. My apologies. So I'm going to unmute each individual at a time, so that way we avoid any possible feedback occurring. So Rabia, I'm going to unmute you right now. Please go ahead. We can't hear you. That's fine. We'll give you an opportunity to quickly fix that issue. I'm going to jump to Manar. Manar, how about you go ahead?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. It's great to be here. My name is Manar Ghamyan, and I graduated from McGill in 2012. From the Faculty of Management, I've worked in the world of business and franchising, and Booster Juice in particular, for the past 5 years, and still somewhat involved, but I switched into psychotherapy, counseling, and spiritual care around 4 years ago. And currently, as Zain, you mentioned, I am working at a hospital here in Toronto, providing spiritual support and care to our patients here. Looking forward to what our panelists have to share and to learn from them and to get the questions of our attendees. What I hope to do today is to provide a foundation, a spiritual foundation that we can hope to adapt or adopt. And it will be the foundation that what our panelists have to share, what I hope to share will be a good foundation for them to build upon and to integrate the spiritual aspects of responding to COVID with the practical, with the emotional and psychological. And I hope that people find benefit in what we have to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabia, I'm going to unmute you here, and we'll give this a second shot. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank God. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Rabia Siddiqui. I am a registered psychotherapist qualifying in Ontario. I currently work at the Canadian Mental Health Association in a dialectical behavior therapy program. I was first drawn into mental health when I was really young because I saw people close to me experiencing mental health issues, looking towards counseling. And one of the things that always really struck me was that it wasn't something that people would talk about. It was something that, especially in our communities, so I myself am from a Pakistani background. So in the Pakistani and the Muslim communities, this conversation really never happened. And so that was sort of what drove me to explore it a little bit more. And that's kind of what brought me here. When I was at McGill, I hosted for a couple of years an annual event that brought in panelists who were talking about the impacts of mental health and the different ways that it can be approached from a spiritual perspective, from a psychological perspective, from different types of therapeutic perspectives. And so this is something that's very close to my heart. I hope to be able to speak to the mental health impacts of COVID today alongside my esteemed fellow panelists. I think that's all I have to say. Zhang gave the bio. That's everything else about me.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's really nice having you here as well, Rabia. Thank you. And last but not least, Alvina, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Bonjour. My name is Alvina, and Zain pretty much said everything. So I'll just add, probably some of you are wondering like what happened to the engineer that like turned into a coach and what's going on. So just for fun. I think growing up, I was always somebody that was very, like I call it center-brained. I had like this creative side, but I also was very into math and science because I was just so curious as a person that I wanted to know how everything worked. And so growing up, once I was in the field and working, the creativity side wasn't being fed and the human connection side wasn't really being fed that much. So I started to seek that out, like, the connection element was missing. So I started to look at what I could do to really find it more fulfilling. And so that's where I discovered coaching, and I absolutely love it. It's great work. It really is. It's really a journey that you get into and with other people, and it's just amazing to be part of someone else's journey and their successes. So that's what I love about coaching. And last year I decided to launch my own practice, and you mentioned it, Alvina, and coaching. And so yeah, so now I'm here. Thanks, Zane.
Thank you. Thank you. It's quite an honor to have three panelists here with us today who are actually truly passionate about what it is that they're doing. A quick administrative point here for all of our wonderful attendees. You should have the option to send in questions. Please feel free to send in questions throughout the event and discussions. We will be filtering them and we will post them to the respective panelists that they are intended for. Also, we will be having a Q&A session towards the end of the event where if you have not had the opportunity to ask your question throughout the discussions and it was not answered, you can ask the questions then. Now that that's out of the way, we can really truly get into the meat of the discussion here. And to start this off, what I was thinking is we would look at it a really big picture. And Manar, I think what I was thinking was this would be a question that would be directed towards you. For a lot of us today, this is the pandemic is an event, an experience that none of us have experienced in our lifetimes, and nothing similar to it in our lifetimes. How do we situate ourselves, within everything that is happening? How do we make sense of it all? Like, people ask whether, is there a reason for this? Why is this happening? Is this a trial? Is this supposed to be just random? Could you speak to that for a few minutes?
Sure. With talking about what a spiritual response to something like this, our spirituality is a function of our physical actions, the function of our heart, our psyche, our emotions, our intellect, and there's a lot to discuss. And for the sake of time, I think one of the more important questions that really informs our spiritual response to COVID. And I differentiate between spiritual reaction and spiritual response. A reaction may be one that is not necessarily informed or disciplined or shaped by our intentionality of how we want. So we might feel fear or uncertainty or concern or worry or being hopeless, being lonely. These are all manifestations of spiritual reactions, but a response is really something that we take time to cultivate, we take time to shape. And one of the more important elements of forming this response is to recognize what COVID-19 is in terms of God's will. So, you know, we can say, is COVID-19 a punishment? Is it a blessing? Is it a test? And that really depends on how we receive it. And what I mean by that is the way that you situate yourself with this external reality and how your approach to it is evidently shapes that reality for you. So if you receive this as a punishment, then it will be received as a punishment. If you receive it as something else, it will be something else. And that is very clear from the hadith of the Prophet, where he once visited a Sahabi, one of the companions who was ill, and it was the practice of the Prophet to say to whomever he visits, La ba's tahur inshallah. This is not an excessive hardship, but this is just merely a purification. So he visited this companion and he said to him, we hope that this is not excessive hardship for you, but it's merely a purification for you. So the companion, who was not able to see beyond the pain that he was experiencing, he said, tahur? He said, purification? Purification? He says, no, this is an overbearing and overwhelming fever that has struck an old man that will cause him to visit the grave. And the Prophet's response to that is, فَنَعَمْ إِذًا. If this is how you're seeing it, then this is your reality. If this is how you're receiving this, then it's only what you plan to see of it. So for many of our recent graduates who are looking for employment, who are looking to start their careers, in many ways this has been nothing but something that pushed them a few months down the line. Now is one of the worst times to seek new employment. So that is a reality in a sense. But receiving COVID, you can, if COVID really brings you closer to Allah, then it becomes a blessing. If your response to it was something that would push you away from Allah, how could God do this to me? I've been working towards this day for the past 5 years. I've had plans. I've had a 5-year plan. Now that's all being pushed. The company that offered me the position hasn't offered me a position. Whatever it may be, if that causes some distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that becomes perhaps a punishment. But ultimately what COVID-19 and all of what it does to our environment, it's a trial. And if we are receiving that trial and we recognize it's a trial and we attempt to receive that trial with patience and we try to be content with what God has for us, this uncertainty that He has placed us in, then ultimately that transforms that experience into an experience of blessing and it becomes manifest blessing. So yeah, that's one way to look at it, to see it as not a punishment, not an act of randomness, but an act of God's will, and it's for us to receive it in that positive way and to find our footing in where God has placed us, to lean into the uncertainty, if you may, and see what we can learn from ourselves, what we can learn from our environment. Yeah.
No, that's that I think that's a pretty incredible way of opening up this discussion. Before we actually go ahead, because I know you briefly did mention individuals who are graduating, we had a few polling questions for our audience here in order to get a better understanding of who our audience is. And we had a question when our audience entered the lobby, they had a question. I'm wondering if the IT team in the background could display the results, or if that's not possible, because I saw a very brief flicker of the results come on. If that question could be very quickly thrown up again. Oh, wonderful. We do have the results here. So as I think, as we can see, working actually probably very well with the title of the event, because it was directed towards the younger alumni, and we see that the majority, almost 70% of our audience here is between the ages of 22 and 30. So that's really good to know. We do have two other questions, and we're going to quickly send them out as well, and we'd like you to take 15-20 seconds to answer those questions so we can gauge who our audience is here. So you should have the question on your screens right now. Just go ahead, pick the answer. I'm going to give you guys another 15 seconds, and then we will get the answers. All right, could we see the answers, please? Okay, so we do have 25% of the audience is made of students, 61% currently employed, 7% not employed, and 7% looking for employment. So for sure, we will try our best to try and get to the concerns that every sort of audience member has here. In particular, if we don't address a particular area that's of concern to you, please send us a question, and we'll try and direct that towards one of our panelists. And the last question that we have here, can we have that on the screen? So this is for the individuals who are employed, which made up a significant portion. Where are you working from? Okay, we'll take another 5 seconds. All right, let's see the answers. Okay, so 70% of the individuals who are currently employed are working from home, and a very small percentage either working as an essential worker or working from their standard work location, which is quite interesting, I'd say. So I think we did have some topics in mind for individuals working from home, so we'll be touching on those down the road as well. Okay, so getting back into this, I think Manar, you definitely you started off. I think how do you receive this? It really depends on how you are viewing it, right? So it's an internal thing. So I think you indirectly touched on aspects of tawakkul, as well as just having sort of like an optimism, or at least not pessimism, right? In the way of like receiving this all of this information. But talking about information, right, Rabia? So this one's for you. We live in a world and age of information. We're constantly plugged in, right? There is bombardment of news. Oftentimes, at least at the beginning, I feel personally as if it's somewhat tapered now, but particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, it was constant negative news. Now with WhatsApp messages, a lot of like fake news that's not even really news, being bombarded to you. I see Alvina laughing. You've got your aunts and your like old uncles sending you these conspiracy theories. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this information overload? And maybe even if there are any sort of like practical tips that you have to offer for us.
At this point, I think a lot of people have figured out what approach they want to use. So this is really a very personal decision that everyone will have to make. For some people, it ultimately comes back to what is going to help you feel more in control of a particular situation. And this particular situation has thrown a lot of people into a loop, and there's a lot of feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and people aren't really sure how they can navigate, because a lot of the things that they took for granted, the routines that they were in, have been shifted. And they've had to make a lot of adjustments, a lot of transitions really, really quickly. And so when there's so much up in the air, and things are definitely settling right now. But when there are still things up in the air, it becomes up to you to determine what approach you want to take. It's a little bit sort of like what Manar was saying. And so for some people, that sense of control that they're going to get back to alleviate some of those feelings of helplessness and to help them feel perhaps less anxious or whatever other difficult emotions might be coming up right now. For some people, that might actually mean tuning into the news. It might actually mean tuning into the news and maybe tuning in a way where they're able to filter out some of that fake news and some of that more biased news. This might look like tuning in for the federal response that the Prime Minister makes every morning, or whatever your provincial premier is making. This might mean specifically sticking to websites like the CDC or WHO or Health Canada, official websites that aren't going to have other types of information. For others, it might mean taking a step back and really not looking at any of that. It might mean taking a break from the news if that is possible for them. It might mean having to actually set some boundaries with their loved ones who might be informing them of the news about things like, oh, did you hear there were this many cases today in our region? So really, at this point, I think a lot of people will have realized where they're leaning towards. Initially, I think a lot of us felt like we needed more information to feel more informed, to feel like maybe we were able to do more. And at this point, I don't know if that's the case for a lot of people. If I can speak personally, I've realized I don't need the information anymore. And if I can get that information, say, from my partner, then that's enough for me. Otherwise, I'm not looking for the news anymore. And so some of the things that I've had to do for that was stop engaging with the news. And so I guess it's going to be an individual response based on what people want to do. If it's possible for you, if this is not going to offend a lot of people, I would even suggest leaving some of the WhatsApp chats that are going on, or at least politely telling people not to share some information. I know I've had some conversations with my parents about the types of information that they're sharing on WhatsApp, because it may be real, it might not be real. Either way, it's not helpful for me, and that's a boundary that I've had to make. Those would be my 2 cents.
Okay. No, I think putting the phone down is a pretty hard sort of thing to do, particularly when you're trapped at home the whole time, which is interesting because it's connected to my next question. You know, a decent percentage of our population here who's attending is working from home. And somebody did ask the question. I can answer that myself. How many people are attending? So we have approximately a total of 50 individuals in the virtual room here with us. So that's nice to have. And a majority of these people are working from home. So what that's doing is it's there's a lot of social isolation, and some people thrive in those environments. I have friends who are loving it. They're just like, this is the best thing, right? And there are others who are struggling, and I'd say I'm one of them. How and even honestly, even the ones who do love this type of environment generally do have some sort of threshold, and after which they also do want to engage with other individuals, but the restrictions that are placed upon us are as such that we just can't do that. How do we deal with this? Rabi, I'll just stick with you for the beginning of this question.
That's a good question. Again, I'm going to probably say this a lot. It's going to be based on your own unique circumstances. I think there was a lot of experimentation that happened in the beginning, where a lot of people were trying, for example, Zoom chats, Hangouts over FaceTime and things like that. And they were finding that it still wasn't able to fulfill them in the way that they were looking for. That social connection that maybe they were looking for was still not possible because it was a different type. And what we have found out since is a lot of like research has come out about this, and different professionals have been able to speak about this. Engaging with people virtually is more tasking. It's more It's actually a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels more strenuous to us than actually engaging with them in person. So doing this thing that we thought was a substitute for not feeling isolated actually ended up being something that was making people more tired, maybe making them feel more isolated. And so that was something that happened. At this point, I think a lot of regions are coming into a phase where they are able to expand their social circles in some way. And so if that is something that is possible for you, and of course, over here, different people have their different considerations, different family dynamics, different health concerns within your home. If this is something that is possible for you, it is, and it is something that is sanctioned at this point, being able to do like even social distance meetups is something I think that would be a really good idea. And converting back to those old technologies as opposed to the newer technologies, I think there's something that has to be said for how nice it was to be able to connect with someone over the phone or send a text message or send a letter. I've done that at one point during this experience, and it was really nice to sort of take a step back. Social isolation is something that we generally don't deal well with. This is something that gets linked to health factors as well as we grow older, and so it's definitely something that we want to be mindful of. It's something that we want to try and address as best as we can. However, we have to, of course, also keep in mind like safety parameters that are there right now. Zain, you'd mentioned, a lot of us are on our phones, we're at home, and so that can also sometimes lead to sort of a trap where you think you're engaging with people because you're on a platform that's called social media. However, that could actually end up making you feel more alone than actually connected to people. So when you are wanting to connect, the opposite of feeling isolated, what you actually want to be doing is connecting in a meaningful way. And that meaningful way may or may not be social media. And that would be something to explore. How can you have a meaningful connection with someone and through what medium at this time?
Okay, no, that's great. And talking about meaningful connections, Alvin, I'm going to direct this one to you. People, who used to go into work, right? Go into physical workplaces, used to find, these small moments of like meaningful conversation happening with or with their colleagues, with their bosses, and so on and so forth. And now that's completely out of the picture. A lot of the meetings that at least I have are very purpose oriented, right? So we're having this meeting, even though it's a web chat or whatever it is. If it's a call, it's towards a particular end, and so there's no small chat anymore. There's no chat in the while you're grabbing a coffee or something like that. How do you try and like replace that? How do you try and build these professional relationships in the absence of not being able to meet with each other anymore?
It's a good question, a tough one. Well, I just want to combine a few things because you touched interesting points with Manar earlier as well that I kind of want to incorporate into this. And like Rabi has been saying, it's such an individual choice. Like everything that we do, it's our choice. So, and it's based on like how we're built. Like our internal values, like our personalities. There's so many factors that affect like each decision we make sometimes in life. So one of the things I wanted to say though was that this time that we have, if we just kind of shift a little bit for a second the way we see this time, right now it seems long and lonely, but there's another way of viewing it as well, which is to say, hey, we're not running, we're not stuck in traffic. How many times before the pandemic happened do we get into these conversations where like, oh, we're stuck in this wheel and this is going and it's going, and especially like I have 2 little boys, and so for me my life was go to work, no, get stuck in traffic first, then go to work and then run back home, get stuck in traffic, get my kids, we eat, and then we have like half an hour with the kids and then they go to sleep. So life was just like this hectic whirlwind, so if we try to look at it from a way of like, whoa, we kind of have been given a gift of time in this really, kind of, you have to really think like that to see it like that. you know, of course it's horrible and the people who are affected by it, but you know, you are here, I'm doing fine, I'm not sick. So if you are watching this, you still have a choice and the capacity as a person to make this, you know, shift in your mindset, to view this differently, to view this as time to do the things you never got to do, or time to work on that list of goals that you had, or, you know, just live in the moment a little bit. So going back to your question, it depends on what you want to do with this time. Do you really want to hang out with the people at work, or do you want to use this time to work on yourself? Maybe that's your choice. Maybe you want to use this time to develop your professional skills or your personal skills, or maybe you do want to connect, and that's okay too. You know, I did that with some of my old colleagues where we'd say, hey, can we just get on Skype and just chat? And so it wasn't even in work hours, it was like later, we just decided to hang out, you know? So it's just, it's very personal. So you have to, it's important to put yourself first. And for the first time in our lives, like, we get to do that. We have time to put ourselves first, because we have time. We have more time now. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's wonderful. And one of our audience members actually chimed in and said, you know, you can just make random calls to your colleagues as well to discuss, you know, anything. Doesn't have to be work related. And you know, I'd agree with that. You know, I did end up, you know, making some random calls to my colleagues during the workday. Had to replace that genuine coffee chat, which also takes place during work hours. And you know, even though it's like a bit surprising in the beginning, it's like, okay, well, why are you calling me? Is this something that you need from me? But you know, when you have those random conversations and they go on, you know, you can just tell that by the end of it, you're more energized, you're more refreshed, and you can possibly be even more productive at whatever it is that you're trying to do. Malan, I'm gonna loop you in here again. You know, Alvina already kind of touched on this briefly. She talked about, you know, the opportunities that come out of social isolation. You know, what's your take on this? Like, you know, are there, you know, opportunities that are presenting themselves to us? You know, we do have more time to ourselves. People would, you know, previously generally just complain that I can't do XYZ because I just don't have the time for it, right? But now, you know, God's like, there you go, you have time now, right? So so what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think for the first time in my life, I am really able to select who I hang out with. Really, like, you go to work, you have to sit and have that small talk with those same people, and you're like, can't believe you know, he was complaining about our boss again. And this is really a time when you can be extremely selective of who you can hang out with, and we know how companionship really transforms a person. It truly transforms a person, from allowing them to achieve their highest potential to derailing them to the extreme in an extreme way. So social isolation is a welcome strange friend, right? They're there to help. You know, these circumstances, often they're an opportunity for us to examine ourselves, to examine our communities, and to examine ourselves. What I believe is more important than the social isolation is what we do with it. Because if we're filling it with being on social media or watching a never-ending stream of videos on YouTube or movies on Netflix, then we're really missing out on being with ourselves. And ourselves, you know, each one of us has a self that we never sit with, or rarely sit with, and just talk to ourselves or be with ourselves. And this pandemic has given us ample opportunity to just be with ourselves. And there's a lot that we have to offer for ourselves. If we dig deep enough into our hearts, there's a lot that we can offer ourselves. And you know, perhaps our panelists can talk more about that, how we can journal more, or talk more, or take on new habits or new skills that we want to improve. But with social isolation, I think it's an opportunity to experience God on a different pace. You know, if you're a person who often did your salah and you don't have time for sunnah because you have a meeting, now you can do your sunnah, right? That's just an example of having that time to do all these things that we want to do, but we always say that we can't. Now is an opportunity to do that. So yeah, and you know, one more thing I'll say, not speaking as much is really powerful. You know, reducing the amount of speech that we actually engage in is really meaningful. And you know, in the Quran, Lady Mary is asked to say, "Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma," that I have given an oath that I will engage in this act of Sawm. And Sawm here is not Sawm of Ramadan. That one is Siyam. But Sawm here means to fast from speaking. In addition to fasting from eating, but fasting from speaking is also a prescribed act of worship. And this social isolation can be really a prime opportunity for us to practice fasting from speaking, because when you fast from speaking with creation, you free yourself to speak with your Lord. And now is a great opportunity for being isolated from creation to find opportunities to be in intimacy with our Lord. And this is the prime time to do that.
Oh, that's yeah. I really don't have anything to say for that one. But Rabia, what do you think in terms of opportunities? I mean, you know, Manar did briefly mention, you know, some other things that you can do to maybe reflect. You know, different people have different, let's say, flavors of things that they like to engage in. You know, things that maybe are beneficial for our, you know, mental health and well-being as well, because clearly that it has to be a prerequisite then to be able to engage, you know, in a more reflective manner that Manar was talking about.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'd actually written down in terms of like a really important point that I wanted to share was one of the things that we can do during this time is just practice being a little bit more mindful. And so mindfulness is a movement that's sort of taken on, and there's a lot of different understandings of it. Some people think it's meditation. Some people think it's like a particular Eastern practice. Some people think it's a particular religious practice. And really, it can be those things, and it can also just be moments where we are just a little bit more present and more self-aware. So it's the opposite of being mindless. And I think in our day-to-day lives, otherwise, we have a tendency to be very mindless. I can only speak for myself, but whether you're sitting in traffic, whether you're sitting in a meeting, whether you're just sitting in front of a TV or in front of social media, you can do all of these things quite mindlessly and still get the job done. And so during this time, I was speaking about this with a couple of colleagues just last week as well. There's a lot of things that have sort of become more apparent because there's nothing sort of distracting us from it. However, we might still not realize, you know, what these things are unless we take the time to be a little bit more mindful. So one thing that I really recommend, whether I'm working with my clients or if I'm even just saying this to myself, is practice being a little bit more mindful, at least on a daily basis. You could choose a moment and you can choose a particular practice that you want through which you do this. So Manar had mentioned things like journaling. So journaling is a really good way. I know a friend who does something called a brain dump, where she'll just write everything down. And then once she's rereading it, she'll find these interesting things coming up that weren't necessarily in her awareness. And so journaling is one way of doing it. Some people might be able to do this through meditation. Some people might need prayer to do this. Some people might do something like exercise. And some people might just want to just sit still and just observe what's happening for them on that day. How are they feeling emotionally? How are they feeling physically? That's a big part of what's going on. I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic and working from home has been being able to have more time at home, which has meant a little bit more time to rest. And what a difference can that make on your overall well-being? So how do you feel physically? Do you feel rested? Do you feel like, you know, satiated hunger-wise? Do you feel uneasy in some way? And so if we can practice a little bit of mindfulness every day, what that will do is help us sort of just be a little bit more cognizant of where we are at, what we can learn from this experience. So those opportunities that you're talking about, those will become apparent to us. And then it'll also give us the presence of mind to be able to proceed onwards and make the decisions about, okay, so what do we want to do with our time on a day like this? And what do we want to do with our time during this time? Is it that we want to spend it more with our loved ones? Do we want to pick up a hobby? Do we want to maybe just rest? Maybe when we're practicing that mindfulness piece, we're realizing we're actually not that well rested. And maybe interacting with people is a little bit more hard on us than helpful. And so listening to your body, your mind, what it's trying to communicate with you, and then proceeding with that can be really powerful. I think that's an opportunity that we've been afforded here.
No. Yeah. We have you know, our audience kind of chiming in here, you know, telling us that, you know, it's an opportunity to learn new skills. It's an opportunity to give more time to yourself and to your family, all of which, you know, are clearly definitely opportunities that arise out of this situation. Talking about, you know, trying to develop skills, Alvina, what do you think from a professional development perspective, right? You know, there's a lot of things that we tell ourselves. We're like, oh, you know, that's on my list. I need to do that. I need to do that. I'm going to build up my resume. I'm going to do all of these things. And then, you know, and you just tell yourself that I didn't have time for it. You know, I'm so busy. I'm so tired and all of these things. So do you think this is a good opportunity for those times as well? Or maybe, again?
Absolutely. It's a great time. You know, there's a few things, you know, like what I'm sharing now is also things that came up for me. So like I mentioned before, I have 2 boys. So they're 3.5 and 13 months old. So my 3.5-year-old, he, you know, he doesn't know what a pandemic is. He just sees this as an opportunity where he gets to be with mom and dad for like 5 months, and that has never happened before, you know, unless it was like during a mat leave. So he's just like enjoying this moment, you know, and I sometimes observe him and I'm just like, wow, you know, we as parents are told to model the behavior that we want our kids to emulate. But right now it's like, I have some behavior that I could learn from him and he's actually modeling for me and I should emulate it. And that's just the idea of like living in the moment. You know, like when he's running after that butterfly, it's just him and that butterfly, you know? And so that is just, it's really like meta what I'm saying, like this big idea, but it's true. Like how often do we allow ourselves to just be this very like now and like enjoy it and honor it, you know, at this present moment. So that's just like, that was like one of my like ahas, like, wow, like I have something to learn from my kids too. And just to connect this back to your question, so using this time, one of the greatest things you can do, and as a coach, I do this often with my clients, it's asking them this very important question, which I find is at the base of any kind of development you want to do. You really have to first ask yourself, like, what are the things I value? So like, make a list of the top 3 things you value in your life and question them, because sometimes some things are imposed on us, whether it's society or whatever. Just question them to really find out if they are truly your values that you hold to. And once you know that, make decisions in your life that are based on those values. So including your job, you know. So for example, I had a client that said that, you know, the things they value were family, family, and there was what else was there? But the reason why family is sticking there is because she had top three things. The other 2 were being fulfilled in her job, but not family, because her family is back in Malaysia. And so in that moment, you could see that she kept going back to family, but even though we were talking about her career. So here it was like, you know, it was clear to me to see that like the reason why she wasn't feeling fulfilled was because one of her top values wasn't being honored. So, you know, so at the core of everything we do, if we take action based on these values, we're always going to find life fulfilling. We're always going to find life like with a purpose, because we're fulfilling these values that we hold so dear. So that's what it comes back to being mindful in everything that we're saying. It's take this time to get to know yourself. Like, who are you really? Talk to the mirror if you need to, and journal or whatever it is that you need to do, or talk to a therapist or a coach or whoever you need to get this out of you, to just put it in front of you, right? Or if you have a friend that's a good listener and won't like give you advice, he just wants to listen, that also helps.
That's me.
So take those values and build your actions around them, so that you do get fulfillment in your career and in your anything really. And and while you're doing that, one thing that's really great to do is look at also your image of success. Like, what does success mean to you? And question that as well. Where does that image come from? Like, for example, as an engineer, I work on sites, and the image of a successful leader was a tough big guy, which I'm not. I'm 5'2" and I'm not a tough big guy. So for me in the beginning, that was so hard, because I was like, I'm never gonna be a leader in this field. Like, why did I choose this field? What am I doing? Right? I felt so disheartened and discouraged, because I had this image that I was trying to emulate that I could never emulate. It was not me. It didn't chime in with my values either, and I can't physically become that thing. so the idea was like, so now that I'm a coach, I understand, and I can understand that the idea is to build your own image of success, and then use the skills you have, the traits that you have, and find like the superpowers in your traits, and not always fall in the traps of the traits. And so once you're aware of your own traits and the positive and the negative potential of your traits, you can actually avoid the negative, focus on the positive, and use that to to lead and to be successful in your career, and stop worrying about this image. So yeah, I feel like it's a great time to reflect, really, in all aspects.
No, that's strong. That's a strong point for sure. What I also want to touch up on here, Alvina, is this is I don't think we have a huge percentage of the population who falls in this bucket right now, but there are people who are looking for essentially employment at this point in time. It's a very difficult sort of time to to try and like enter the job market. There's a lot of statistics around when people enter the job markets during periods of recession. It has a significant impact on their careers, not even just during the recession, but even once the recession ends. There's all of this like uncertainty, and obviously there are people who currently do have jobs, but there's like this odd uncertainty looming overhead that will I still have this going forward? Like how focusing on uncertainty specifically, what do you think? How should these individuals who are looking to enter the job market, or who unfortunately have lost their jobs at this point in time, and they're dealing with that uncertainty, how should they deal with that?
I think it comes down to making a choice of what to do with that uncertainty, and it's what you can choose to do is focus on what you do have control over right now. Like, what is in your power, what is within your reach, and focus on that and try to reach for that. So what I'm trying to say is, if right now that means accepting an opportunity that might not be the best thing in the world that you imagined, like your top, it's okay. Like, we're in a pandemic, like, so because just getting that, like just taking a baby step is still a step. So just remembering that even if I take a baby step, it's still a step towards the bigger picture or the bigger goal that I have. So not to not dismiss things because it's not good enough, because right now everything is good enough, and so, and to be okay with that, and not be judgmental towards ourselves for making choices that we would have maybe not made before. So I'm just gonna say this because in our community, like, sometimes taking a job up as a cashier or like something is like frowned upon, especially if you're highly educated, and all this, like, this image, again, this image stuff and status and all that. So let's put that all aside. We don't have time for this. So let's focus on what we can do, and that allows us to then build from there. If you just get stuck in your uncertainty, there's no building there. Now you're just kind of spinning in circles. I need to get out of that. And by doing that, to do that, I mean, it's to focus on what you do have in control, what you have in your hands, and use what you have in front of you. So for people searching for jobs, it's definitely not easy, but again, like, whatever opportunities are available, you should go for them, because this is temporary in the end. We have to realize, like, this is not a forever thing. and it's temporary. And like human beings, we're resilient creatures. You know, there's been, yes, this type of things only happens every 100 years, but it does happen. And we're still here and we're still growing, maybe a bit too much, like, but we're still here, right? So it's gonna end one day, and then you can go back to the things that you aspired for, but just don't stop from taking a step because it's too little. That's what my main message is.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very good advice. Sticking to uncertainty, Rabia, you know, uncertainty, like from a broader perspective, not just people who, you know, are in the job market or something like that. There was a bit of like structure that life had that we lost once, you know, once we entered the pandemic, the lockdown, everybody staying at home, social isolation, you know, and in the absence of that structure, you know, there's a different type of uncertainty, right? It can lead to, you know, anxiousness, anxiety, you know. How do you suggest that, you know, one should deal with that type of uncertainty?
The number one thing that I say to all my clients is, first of all, you have to understand that the anxiety is there for a reason. So what we often do is we make anxiety this like really negative thing, and we think that the only way of dealing with anxiety is to get rid of it completely. And that is neither helpful nor realistic. So we have to make peace with the fact that anxiety is here to stay. It's an adaptive emotion and it serves a purpose. If it wasn't helpful, it would have been screened out of our genetics a long time ago, but it serves a purpose. And we have to honor the fact that at the moment, we are living in kind of a dangerous world, right? There is this virus out there that could impact you, and you don't know what the impact of that can be, and you could be a carrier, and there's a lot of coulds, right? So to deny that is not helpful. We have to accept it, and accepting this will mean accepting the reality that this will make you a little bit anxious, and that's okay. If we can understand that anxiety is there because it is almost there to, as with all of our emotions, to communicate with us, to send us a message, then we can feel a little bit more empowered in terms of what we can do about it. So instead of our response being, okay, let's try to get rid of this anxiety and this uncertainty, if we can build towards a place of acceptance, and this takes time. Acceptance isn't something that you just either have or don't have. It's an ongoing process. It's probably a daily process for a lot of people. If you can work towards building acceptance that this anxiety is here to stay and all that I can do is respond, then that will actually help the anxiety come down in its intensity, and those feelings of hopelessness and helplessness that can come with it, they can also be kept at bay. And so some ways that you might do that is consider, well, what works for you in terms of managing anxiety? For some people, just practicing acceptance, and practicing acceptance can mean doing self-talk. It can mean tawakkul. It could mean certain practices just to help. So again, some people journal. Some people have medication that they take. It really has to be what they do, and that's okay as well. So everyone is different in terms of what practices they use. Some people exercise. If you can get that anxiety response a little bit more under control for you, if you can develop a plan in terms of what you can do for it, you will find that the anxiety will be okay. Anxiety is not something that is a permanent emotion or experience. It's usually fleeting. When you're in it, it feels like it is everything. It has this ability to completely block out everything else, and that is true. And it is temporary, just like this pandemic. And so if you can practice accepting, and we have in DBT a term called coping ahead, if you can practice coping ahead, where you imagine that you are dealing with this anxiety and what will be helpful for you at that time, what is sort of like the worst case scenario that you're anticipating, and is it really that bad? Is there nothing else that can be done? If something can be done, what is that thing? If you can practice coping ahead, that can be a really good way of dealing with that anxiety. If you type coping ahead DBT into Google, you will get like worksheets on how to do this if you feel like you need some more structured way of doing this. But I would also say rely on your own internal knowledge. That's where I always start with people. What do you know about yourself in terms of how you manage difficult situations, stress, anxiety, uncertainty in other situations, and what can we extrapolate from that and apply to this situation? This is not that much of a different situation. There are differences, yes, and still we can utilize people's strength from different areas of their life here.
Okay, now that's very good perspective. Manar, I wanna kind of stick to this topic because I think this is almost like at the core of everything. Uncertainty. Like people don't know what's happening next. When are we going back to the office? When can we go back to like the restaurants? Like when, right? So nobody knows, and then at the same time nobody knows. From more of like an Islamic perspective, is certainty in what's going to happen to us here right now, is that even something that we should be looking for? As Rabia said, Rabia is saying that that's not necessarily something that should always be trying to eliminate, that is uncertainty, right? In that way, what do you think?
Yeah, I think uncertainty is only an illusion. It's uncertainty because we don't have perfect knowledge of what's going to happen. But God has perfect knowledge of what's going to happen. It's everything's set up, everything's clear. There's no uncertainty as with regards to God's knowledge of what's going to happen. What we have to do, I think, is just attach our hearts to that certainty that is with God. And doing that is far more difficult than just saying it. What Alvina and Rabia said about things being temporary, in a devotional prayer that says أيها الحامل هما إن هذا لا يدوم مثل ما تفنى المسرة هكذا تفنى الهموم. It's a devotional prayer. It says, "Oh, you who's holding a burden, this too will fade away, just as the moments of happiness fade away. This too will also fade." So just reminding ourselves that these times of difficulty will fade, just like our times of happiness and satisfaction. Those have passed, and those we all know pass very quickly after you buy a new iPad, iWatch, or a new this or that. We have those moments of happiness, but it fades. This too will go away. So this will go away for sure. And just because of time, I will say that this is absolutely an opportunity to speak to God in a way that we haven't spoken to Him perhaps before. Many people I know share that the moments of greatest intimacy that they have had with God was at moments of greatest uncertainty that they had in this world, because there's so much desperation in their calling upon Allah that they find intimacy in that. And many people have the experience that they almost yearn for that uncertainty, because at some point in their life, because the intimacy that they had with God, just because they were calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was so powerful and so meaningful that they yearn sometimes to the uncertainty. So it is an opportunity for us to be to cultivate a healthier relationship with Allah. And then the last thing I would say is one of the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'Allah Sikandari, one of the hikam, one of the the wise sayings of one of our righteous. He says, "Let go of over management. Put yourself at rest from over management. What has been already planned and what has been already assigned to you is going to happen. So don't worry about it." Right? It's much harder to say than to do, but what is assigned to you is there. What's assigned to you is already in your possession, or it already has your name on it. You just have to gain possession of it, right? It's like one of those people who said, we've won the war, now we just have to fight the battle, right? It's a process of having this thought that it's going to be okay. I have my trust with Allah. Now I just have to walk the path until I reach that point, because I know it's going to happen, right? And so setting our trust with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having tawakkul, obviously, that everything is in God's hands. This is not random. This is not chaos. In the eyes of reality, this is not chaos, even though in the eyes of what we see in this temporal world, it is chaos. But in the eyes of haqiqah, in the eyes of reality, this is all according to a beautiful, pristine plan, and each one of us has a role to play and to discover. And once we do that, then we start to reap the fruits of this challenging time.
Okay. No, that's beautiful. And I think that sentiment's being echoed from our audience as well. I'm seeing not really a question, but just the audience members chiming in to say that they really appreciate your view on this. Okay, so I think it's a good opportunity to actually take a question from the audience here, and I think this one is geared towards Rabia. I'm going to get it towards you first, and then we'll see if maybe any of the other panelists have an opinion on this. I work in healthcare, and I feel enraged when I see people not taking COVID-19 seriously. It depresses me and angers me. How can I deal with this rage better?
What a question. A very it's a sentiment that I can empathize with. Here's the thing. Ultimately, you have to come back to what is within your control and what is not within your control, right? Our emotions, we cannot necessarily control when they initially come out. Again, for the same reasons that I was saying earlier, our emotions are communicating something with us. The rage is telling you about your own values. You know, your anxiety, if there's anxiety there, would tell you about your own fears about potentially, you know, what this person could do. There is nothing you can do about those initial emotions coming up, and realistically, there is nothing you can do about these people who are not taking it seriously. All that we can do is control our own responses, and that's not to say that the rage you feel is invalid in any way. I think we can all appreciate that the rage makes sense, and I think the majority of people would echo the sentiment. The thing is, what is the rage doing for you? So is the rage helping you in any way, or or on the other side, is it potentially hurting you and hurting your ability to work with people? It's lessening your ability to be compassionate and empathetic towards the people maybe that you are working with, that you are dealing with, who may or may not be these same people who are not taking COVID seriously. So it comes back to, like, what are your values? Do you want to be that passionate and compassionate person? Compassionate and empathetic person? And if so, we must realize all that might be within your control is your own response to your own emotions. So is the emotion serving you? If it is not, what can you do about it? What are some ways that maybe you can practice a little bit of self-validation, right? What are some ways that maybe you can practice some ways to ease the anger that is within you? It makes sense. And I want to come back to this. A lot of people think that when we work through certain emotions, it means like we're saying, oh, it doesn't matter, or that it's not valid. And that's absolutely not the case here. We are not condoning the other side. What we're saying is, this emotion isn't serving you right now, right? And if it's not serving you, what can you do about it? This might be a point where maybe you get, you see what works for you by yourself. It might be maybe something you get a little bit of support with. Maybe you have peers who can echo the same sentiments, and you can talk to them as well about, like, how are you dealing with it? And understanding that there is a space for the rage, and there's also a space where you process the rage so that it doesn't engulf you. I hope that was able to address that.
I think I hope it was of benefit to the questioner. Now I'm going to ask. Unfortunately, I mean, the time's really flying by here. We have 15 more minutes left in the event itself. So I'll ask for the answers to be a bit brief. You know, for the next few ones, we have another few from the audience. So I'm gonna I'm going to put this one to Alvina. In regards to accepting a step down, say a pay cut of 10-20%, or less learning, opportunities within your work environment, how do you suggest that a person pivots after obviously the pandemic is over, to figure things out? What's your response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to realize is you're not going to be the only one. Like the whole world is going through this. It's not like something happened in your family. It's not the same as like, there's a death in my family and I can't think straight for the next month. This is not the case. It's the world is freaking out, So what I'm saying is I think the result of everything happening is that everyone is shifting or has shifted in a way, whether it's companies that are being more open to different ways of doing things. I'll give you an example. Okay, so I used to work for an engineering company, and like their client was Suncor, which is a big refinery. Okay, so never in the world anybody think that a company that is an oil and gas company it's field work, you have to be on site, would turn to their employees and say, would you like to work from home? Because they had never thought about this. And then that's when they realized like almost like 80% of their employees were able to work from home without losing any efficiency. So what I'm trying to say here is that after this pandemic is over, opportunities will be there for sure, because everything was kind of on pause and we're going to want to ramp up and we're going to want to go back to the way how life used to be. So that means that things will start to go back to normal, so I feel like I can understand the fear, but at the same time everyone is feeling this. And so I think companies are obviously more compassionate towards this idea that, okay, well, someone had to take a break because they didn't have a choice. So it's different now, like people don't think the same way because we all live this as a collective, like humanity is living through this right now. So I think looking at that a bit more could help us cope with this idea of like, how will I deal with this later,
Just to echo that, I've seen a wave of people either retiring early or pushing their retirement until after this whole thing settles down. So opportunities will come for sure. And if someone is like, settling for a less job or less of a pay, to kind of keep in mind that there are going to be opportunities that they'll be able to jump on as soon as.
And also one more thing, like because of the whole, I don't know if you've noticed, but like we're on a webinar right now, so like my point is technology has like kind of boomed and opened up all these avenues, and there's so many webinars and things going on that are free right now. So if you are worried about, well, how will I keep myself like professionally like up top or whatever, that you're like keep up with this, you can sign up for all these webinars that are kind of free right now. So there's knowledge available and also time that maybe we didn't have before to improve ourselves in that way,
No, that's a good way of looking at it. In this together, we're all in the same boat here. Manar, so you spoke briefly. I think there's a question here directed specifically towards you. It seems like a very Ramadan-esque question. How do we maintain our spiritual progress that we made during confinement? Because obviously at some point in time the quarantine's going to be lifted. How do we maintain whatever we benefited from?
That is a Ramadan-esque question, eh? I wish the audience was live. I would have turned this back at them and say, what have you found to be useful? It sounds like that person is having successful habits, is having a meaningful relationship, and it's all about finding those same opportunities later on, or similar opportunities. The Prophet said that the best of actions are those that are consistent, even if they are minor in nature. So now is the time. Now is like it's a spiritual Ramadan where we are really focused. We really have this. We have this i'tikaf, this isolation from everything else that's happening. Once that settles, it's about finding 2 or 3 things that you've done in this during this pandemic that were really meaningful to you, and trying to hold on to them and creating space for them. yeah, I think that's what comes to mind, and asking Allah for assistance in that. That's this can never be overstated. Just asking Allah to help us maintain what we had moving forward.
Okay. No, that's a good one. And I mean, I don't think I need to tell everybody here, but we're entering into the 10 holy days of the first 10 of Zulhijjah as well. So a good opportunity here, as Manar said, we are in an itikaf, which is an isolation, which would generally happen in a mosque, but you could say that your own house is your mosque for the moment. So question here, I mean, I think again, a large chunk of our audience is working from home. Work-life balance. This is like terminology that's been thrown around ever since I've entered the workplace. I've been hearing it. And they say that you have better work-life balance now because shorter commute times, this and that, and so on and so forth. Some people are experiencing the opposite because there is no like delineation between what's work and what's life, right? I know people personally who are working longer hours than they've ever worked before. Fortunately, I'm not one of them. But or at least because there is no change in geography anymore, right? I leave work and I go to the other room, right? And I actually don't even want to look at the corner where I have my laptop, once once it's past 6 p.m., right? So what are your Alvina, let's start with you here. What are your recommendations for trying to find that balance?
Yeah, well, before I even go into suggesting anything, I would say, again, I think it depends on the way we are, because maybe some people like to work. Some people are workaholics. They enjoy it. And so they get like, there's a sense of fulfillment for them from accomplishing, so maybe it's still something that you need to look at, because maybe at one point it becomes unhealthy and it's like too much. It's like any, it's like a drug or whatever. It's like over consuming of something, just like social media, anything can become bad, right? So maybe it's about looking at, well, what are other things that fulfill you, that make you happy? What are some other activities that you enjoy doing? And then maybe what you can do, and again, I'm saying maybe because maybe this will work for some and maybe it won't work for others. So something that you can maybe practice is say, okay, well, what do I like doing? I like to jog. So I'm going to schedule a jog at 5 p.m. on purpose to change that geography, to change my environment, so that when I do come back and I'm not thinking about work necessarily, I'm thinking about taking a shower, I'm thinking about making food now, so just to kind of allow your mind to think about something else, just time certain things that you enjoy doing. Like I like to paint, so maybe I can say, hey, you know what, as soon as I'm done, I'm going to paint, so I have something that's motivating me to like hurry up and finish and go do the other thing that I enjoy doing more than working, for example, so these are some ways you can try, just figuring out what are the other things that you used to do and how can you replace them, maybe, so is it a phone call? Could you ask a friend to call you at a certain time to distract you, to like get you off of your desktop or whatever it is? So there's different ways you can do, but again, it all comes back to how you usually cope with things. And in the end, I feel like all of these discussions are coming back to like self-reflection and thinking about who we are and how we work, how we function.
No, I think that's a very practical response. I think I'm going to try and put that into practice myself, try and like do something at around 5 or 5:30 or whenever it is that the end of the workday is marked. That's great. So, we are getting pretty close to the end here. I will try and take 2 more questions that we have from the audience here right now. I'll try and pose them. I request that, you kind of be super, super brief with these, even though, it's not easy to be very brief with them. But so Rabia, how do we avoid familial conflict when stuck with the same people for months, ideally without talking about boundaries?
It's not possible. I come from a Desi. I know. I come from a Desi household. There are certain spoken and unspoken rules in place. We have values. We don't talk back to our elders. All of that stuff can exist, and at the same time, it is very possible to set boundaries in a way that is, if you don't want to think of it as boundaries, think of it as communication. So boundaries and communication go hand in hand. A lot of us are working in areas where we are sharing our space with other people. Some of us might not even have proper spaces to work. And so at this time, it is really important to be able to at least communicate what you can and cannot do, maybe during your work hours. And so I know someone who was doing dishes and work with children during her work hours because she was just there, right? The expectation was you're just going to do it. If she was not at work, if she was at work, sorry, in the office, she wouldn't be doing that. And so that was a conversation that she needed to have with her partner and her family. And her children were older, so it wasn't a question of someone needs to do it for them or it's not going to get done. So this was a conversation that she needed to have with her family. And then on her part, this is the boundaries part, right? She had to stick with what she was communicating and asking of them, which was, during these hours, I cannot be disturbed, right? If we don't communicate with our families, all that's going to happen is we're going to have resentment built in. It's going to lead to that conflict. It's going to make us more vulnerable to being irritable and angry, and no one wins. So I know how difficult it is to set boundaries, and more importantly, to maintain those boundaries, that it has to be done. And communication is where it starts off. So look into things like, what is assertive communication? How can one be more assertive when they are talking? So you're not being aggressive, you're not being anything else, and you're still able to get a message across, hopefully.
Well, I hope that helps. So last question here, Manar, I'm gonna take this to you. It's from our audience, and I'm gonna put a small twist on it as well from my end. So our audience member is asking, did the Prophet ﷺ or any of his companions, experience something similar to a pandemic in their lifetimes, right? My take on the question here is, is there a prophetic approach to dealing with the pandemic? I know it's a very loaded sort of question. I'm going to give you a minute and a half.
There's a verse in the Quran that Allah is teaching us to engage with during times of difficulty, during times where things are out of our control, during times of difficulty with our parents, during times of dealing with things that we cannot change, people who are not putting masks when they should. And that verse is وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَصِيرٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. The translation is, and I turn my affairs in their entirety to Allah. God has infinite insight to the matters of his servants. So turning our affairs to Allah, saying, I did what I can, and now everything else is in God's hands. And then that's followed with, God has perfect insight and complete insight into our affairs, into our lives, our difficulties, our personal difficulties, our circumstantial difficulties, our emotional challenges, our spiritual pitfalls. God has perfect knowledge of all of that. And to acknowledge that and externalize that, there's a sense of liberation from that by saying, I have no control of this. I'm giving control to someone else. That is, I think, very relevant to our time here. I'm not, so to answer the question explicitly, I don't know of time of the Prophet where the Prophet in his time they experienced the pandemic. During the Sahaba it did, but I think what comes to mind as it is relevant to us is this idea that we turn our affairs to Allah, for Allah has perfect insight into our circumstances.
Yeah. Or may we be able to do so. We're here towards the end of our time here. I'm gonna have to make our closing remarks, and I feel almost sad to say goodbye to you guys, and let you carry on with your lives. But it was wonderful having you guys here. Thank you all for joining the webinar, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for sharing their time and expertise to help us navigate these uncertain times. We would also like to thank Kay and Dalia over at McGill Alumni Relations for their support in making this event possible. I'd like to remind our viewers that this event is hosted by the McGill Muslim Alumni Society, which is open for all McGill alumni to join as members and for all non-McGill graduates, including current students, to join as friends. We'll include the link to the membership form in a follow-up email. Remember that as a member, you get exclusive access to contact and interact with other members of the society, including our panelists from today. In addition, we would love to hear your feedback about this event. And so we will also send you a feedback form to fill out shortly. If you missed something from today's event, we will be sending you a link to the webinar recording, and you'll be able to view it later at your own leisure, inshallah. Lastly, we hope to see you at our upcoming event in September, God willing, virtually, of course, as we are positive you will enjoy and benefit greatly from our keynote speaker and our networking sessions. Become a member and follow our social media pages and learn more in the coming few weeks. Thank you once again, and everybody have a beautiful evening ahead. Assalamu alaikum.